Good evening and welcome to Your Idaho, produced by the Gem State Patriot, an Idaho-based electronic newsletter. My name is Bob Neugebauer, and our special guest for the evening is David Ripley from Idaho Chooses Life. Good evening, David.
Hi, Bob.
It's a pleasure to have you here this evening. I know that this has been a difficult legislative session for you. Can you tell us a little bit about how things have gone in this last legislative session for pro-life?
Well, this is the 62nd legislature. They're on a mad dash as we're recording this to adjourn, perhaps this evening. And they do so after 2 years with having done absolutely nothing to advance the cause of preborn children, the cause of life in the state of Idaho. And in fact, looking back on the last legislative session, the 2013 session, where they passed the Obamacare exchange, and then they rejected our amendment to protect religious liberties. You can actually argue that this legislature is actually taking us backwards, not forward, in terms of defending preborn children.
So you were very much against having that exchange instituted, am I correct?
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
And did that have a lot to do with the fact that the exchange was going to allow for certain abortion methods?
Well, the fact is the Obamacare and Idaho's now partnership with Obama in making the Obamacare happen and being imposed on the people of Idaho has many dangerous, life-threatening ramifications, one of which involves preborn children. We passed legislation in the 2011 session saying that Idaho would not pay for elective abortions through an exchange if that day were to come. However, Congress at that time, when they enacted Obamacare, they're pretty wily people. And so on the one hand, they gave states the authority to opt out of paying for elective abortions, but on the other, mandated that every state have an elective abortion policy available. To this day, we don't know exactly what the state of Idaho is selling to the people of Idaho through that exchange. My belief is that Blue Cross policies require, unless you opt out, it requires every policyholder to contribute to an abortion fund. Most people in the state, of course, have no idea that their dollar is being donated to this slush fund to pay for elective abortions. But the fact of the matter is that that is one aspect of the problem that we're dealing with Obamacare.
Where does this slush fund go to? Where does this money go to? And is it just in a fund, or is it for specific places like Planned Parenthood or places like that?
It's designed to cover for a woman who opts to buy an elective abortion coverage policy. This is how they are able to get around using taxpayer dollars, which is prohibited by the Hyde Amendment.
Right.
But since it's an involuntary, voluntary slush fund, okay, so it's not really taxpayer money, although it's mandated by the federal government. So we don't know yet. In fact, Congress has been fooling around all year with this, and last year as well, trying to get in the House legislation passed that would require companies like Blue Cross to notify all of their policyholders that this slush fund exists. That legislation, of course, was passed by the House, has yet to receive a hearing in the Senate. But that's just one aspect of the life-threatening quality of Obamacare. We have now in the state of Idaho, every policy sold through the exchange covers Plan B, which is so-called emergency contraception, and it covers the Ella drug. I just found out several weeks ago that as a result of that, the state of Idaho, in its policy covering all state employees, also is providing coverage for Plan B and Ella.
So all these legislators who pretend to be pro-life aren't doing anything to help with this situation or put any rules through to stop them from taking place.
Well, in fact, when it became clear to us last session that the exchange was going to pass, we asked the legislature to consider an amendment to the law that they were considering, and we called it the Religious Liberty Amendment, and it said that the state of Idaho would force no Idaho employer to cover drugs like Plan B or Ella as part of its plan. We weren't going to prohibit it, but our position was the state of Idaho has no business forcing employers who have a conscience about life into covering those kinds of drugs for their employees. And the fact is, we were told repeatedly by legislators that the reason we had to pass Obamacare, the reason we had to partner up with President Obama, was to give Idaho a seat at the table so that we could have some control over our own destiny.
So now we know none of us had a seat at the table. Well, there was no table.
Our theory was, okay, if we can't protect the religious liberties of Idahoans, then that argument means nothing.
Right.
And in fact, we did get a vote on that amendment in both the Senate and the House, on the floors of both chambers, and we lost, which to this day stuns me, given the conservative nature of the legislature, the pro-life values of the legislature, their religious affiliations. I thought that was almost a guaranteed deal that we were going to at least get that done.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that we lost. We lost the amendment we only had 11 members of the Idaho State Senate vote for our amendment. We did have a majority of Republicans in the House, but with the Democrats voting against the amendment, we lost.
That's amazing. I'm just kind of surprised to see that all of these legislators, if you go up and ask them if they're pro-life, they'll say, of course I am. I'm a very religious, I'm a Christian person. But when it comes down to the voting end of this, where it affects us in the day-to-day lives, they really don't want to give an inch on this particular plan.
Well, the fact is that vote in particular was very disappointing. And, you've got religious organizations. I don't even know. There may be 24 lawsuits going on in federal court right now trying to protect employers from the Obama mandate. The legislature passed resolution after resolution in the 2011 and 2012 sessions protesting the Obama mandate. And yet, when they had the opportunity to do something effective to protect Idaho's employers and Idaho citizens, we couldn't find enough votes to get the deal done.
Well, there's a primary coming up. We'll have to see what happens in that part. Where have you been working on the legislation this year? What have you been talking about?
Well, we've been pushing legislation to restrict the use of RU-46 in the state of Idaho. We actually don't have specific legislation dealing with the use of this very deadly, serious drug.
Can you tell us a little about what this drug does?
Yeah, RU-46 was actually developed by a company affiliated with the same German company that created Cyclone B during World War II. Their successor company in a subsidiary in France, which is where the RU part of that equation comes from. It's an acronym for the French company that created RU-46. It's designed to destroy a preborn child in the first roughly 90 to 100 days of a pregnancy. And at the end of the Clinton administration, that drug was approved for use in the United States. The FDA put together certain regulations limiting its use, requiring a doctor who prescribes that drug to examine the woman to make sure that she does not have an ectopic pregnancy, to make sure that she has a follow-up visit, because it's a 2-drug regimen. So the first pill is taken in that early pregnancy to kill the baby chemically. The second drug is taken about a week afterwards to induce labor to force her to discharge the dead baby so that she does not, actually she could die from that if she doesn't get the remains of that baby out of her womb. And so Idaho has never specifically addressed the use of that drug, we've been working on legislation that would require every doctor in the state who uses it to follow the FDA protocol. And that would require a two-visit situation where they examine the woman before they give her the drug to make sure how far along she is, and then to make sure that they have a follow-up visit to make sure that, in fact, all the baby has been removed from her womb. Thousands of women have actually been hospitalized for misusing this drug. There are about 24 women in the country that have actually died from misusing this drug. And so our hope was, it was pretty modest legislation, and we were hoping the legislature would take action this year on it. And in fact, we never were able to get a hearing on that bill.
So it's available now in Idaho and people can use it?
Yeah, in fact, the use of that drug is increasing pretty dramatically. We have about 600 abortions being performed in the state using RU46. And in the last 10 years, it's actually become increasingly used for first trimester abortions in the state. It's now about a little over a third of the abortions done in Idaho are done with this drug now.
Planned Parenthood, telemed abortions. Can you explain a little bit about those?
Well, Planned Parenthood has been pushing around the country a new business model. They want to be able to give this drug out over the internet without even having a doctor's interaction with the woman. So,
RU486?
Right. So they want to be able to dispense the drug over the internet without ever examining the woman, without even doing the follow-up visit, which is a very dangerous situation, as I just described. So part of this legislation would have prohibited that and required that there be a licensed physician who examines the woman and then is there to make sure that things have gone all right and that her life or health is not at risk following the abortion.
You know what amazes me is they don't want kids to carry guns on campus because they're afraid they'll hurt themselves, but they're willing to give them a drug that could kill them.
Well, one of the great mysteries of our time is the Planned Parenthood purports to be the pro-woman organization, and yet the practice and the way that they treat women is just horrific.
So anyone who takes this drug is at risk without checking with the doctor first.
There's no doubt about it. Hemorrhaging is a very serious problem. Infection is a very serious problem. I remember several years ago we were at the legislature working on parental consent, and I remember a story of a father who found his dead teenage daughter in her bedroom, and he didn't even know that she was pregnant. And she had gone that afternoon to get RU46, come home, laid down, and bled out from the drug.
Wow. As I understand it, there was a judge, and there was a case in New York by a very liberal judge that allowed a 16-year-old to use this drug. Is that correct? Or was that a different one?
I'm sure there is no age limitation on the use of RU46.
Not at all.
No.
So anybody can buy this drug, and they want to sell it on the internet now?
Well, theoretically, you're supposed to have a doctor's prescription. Theoretically. In fact, one of the issues that came up in this legislative session, a lot of this issue, we need to regulate RU46 regardless, but what makes this more pressing and a cause for immediate action is that Idaho is just dealing with a case called McCormick that came out of Pocatello about 3 years ago. I think the incident actually took place. A woman named McCormick became pregnant and obtained RU46 over the internet. It's one of the more disturbing and peculiar cases I've ever heard of in this sad, tragic business of abortion. She was somewhere between, she was at the end of her second trimester, beginning of her third trimester of pregnancy, and decided that she didn't want the baby. She got her sister apparently to obtain RU46 over the internet. she took the first drug, then she took the second drug, and it worked. And I had no idea until that occurred that anybody could kill a baby with RU-46 that late in pregnancy. But apparently it worked. And she was able to get rid of the baby, but then she was left with the remains of the baby.
Oh my God.
So she wraps the dead baby in a plastic garbage bag, puts it in a cardboard box, and stores it on her porch.
Oh.
And weeks pass. She doesn't know what to do with this baby. It's, of course, deteriorating and beginning to decay, and the smell is atrocious. People are coming in and out of her house, and finally somebody called the police, the Pocatello police, and asked to see what was going on. They, of course, smelled the baby immediately, took the baby in for an autopsy, which is how we know that it was early third trimester. That case resulted in a criminal charge being filed against her, because since 1972, Idaho has made it a crime to perform a self-abortion. That means for this very circumstance.
Well, hold on one second. It's a crime to perform a self-abortion, but it's okay to take this drug? They allow the drug, but it's a crime.
Well, theoretically speaking, it's illegal. What she did was illegal. For an Idaho woman to get a drug over the internet without a doctor's prescription is illegal. Okay, and this question of whether or not Idaho is going to legalize self-abortions, it's kind of a complicated deal, as everything is about this abortion business. That McCormick case resulted in she had no money to give that baby life, but somehow managed to come up with $200,000 or $300,000 to sue the state of Idaho through channels, of course, we don't know yet because it's all confidential. I believe Planned Parenthood was funding that case. Judge Windmill, our federal judge, who has never met an abortion law he liked, ruled that Idaho's law dealing with criminalizing self-abortions was illegal because of some legal technicalities, and enjoin the enforcement of that law in the state of Idaho.
So it's okay to kill a baby now?
Well, it's okay apparently for a woman to kill a baby illegally and illegally.
I see.
And this provoked, by the way, one of the strangest experiences I've ever had in the pro-life movement. There are actually pro-life organizations who do not support our position. Idaho Chooses Life position is that we need to restore that law. We need to do everything we can to deter women from self-abortions, both with the hope of saving the baby, but also to keep her from doing to herself what Ms. McCormick did to herself. I mean, the fact that she didn't kill herself with those drugs is God's providence, in my opinion. And the fact is, the U.S. Supreme Court has never recognized a woman's right to self-abortion, and for very good reason. There are very profound health and safety concerns associated with self-abortions, both taking the proverbial coat hanger to oneself, or doing drugs like this without doctor supervision. And it's our position that the state of Idaho should do everything it can to discourage that practice. Some pro-life groups take grave exception to that and believe that we ought to be more compassionate to women and we ought to decriminalize or legalize self-abortions in the state of Idaho. And that's a position that I vehemently disagree with.
So you're telling me that these are pro-life groups, but they go along with self-abortions?
There are pro-life groups in the state of Idaho that I've been, in fact, it was part of the reason that this legislation this year took so long to develop, because behind the curtain there was an intense struggle between Idaho Chooses Life and a couple of other groups in the state over how to deal with RU-46 in the context of self-abortions. That issue we have grave disagreements between the groups over. It slowed down the development of the legislation, and it wasn't until about the middle of February that we came to the point of saying, listen, we are not going to agree on how to handle self-abortions in the state of Idaho. So we need to take that language out of the bill and separate these questions. So we're going to regulate RU46 in the case of legal abortions, where a woman goes to a doctor in Idaho, and we're going to set this other issue aside. The self-abortion issue, we're going to set this aside for another day, because we are not going to come to agreement.
Well, I have a hard time understanding how somebody can be pro-life and allow a self-abortion. That's a real mixed bag of tricks for me. I can't get my head around that one.
Well, until this McCormick case, it was my assumption that pro-life groups were all on the same page with respect to abortion, what we would do, for example, if Roe v. Wade were ever struck down.
Right.
We would, of course, want to make it illegal. Well, apparently I'm mistaken in that assumption. There are pro-life people who believe that the woman is the second victim in an abortion circumstance, and that our job is to basically treat her with the same level of compassion as we would treat the baby that she's seeking to terminate. There's no doubt that we need compassion. There are many women who are forced into abortions, coerced into abortions, and the fact is it's not really so much the question of punishing the woman as it is trying to deter the woman. And the fact is she is a free moral agent in most cases. She is the principal decision maker about whether that baby lives or dies. And to me, I do not understand how we're ever going to get at this question of saving those babies from slaughter without holding the woman accountable for the decision that she's making.
Yeah, I can see where you have a very long, hard road to hoe ahead of you. An interesting sidestep here is I was reading some articles about how many babies have been killed, and it's, over 50 million, am I correct?
Well, the truth is only God knows how many babies have been slaughtered, and there are a lot of reasons for that. The official tally is somewhere in the neighborhood of 56 million. That is a low estimate, I can guarantee you. That, for example, those numbers do not include the state of California, okay? The state of California does not report abortions to the federal government, or in fact, they don't even require reporting, okay? No chemical abortions outside of that framework in most states are part of that calculus. That calculus also does not take into account the babies killed through Plan B or Ella.
That's a whole generation.
It's a staggering number.
Yes, it is. And, we're wondering why we don't have enough people in our workforce. We want to bring more immigrants in. Can you imagine if we had kept all these babies, we wouldn't have any problems?
Well, I think the mystery is that, there are many people who argue that we have economic, conservatives, we have social conservatives, we have all these divisions within the conservative movement. But the fact is, life is the key to the entire deal. You cannot have economic growth if you don't have workers who produce that wealth.
We see that what's happened in Japan. I mean,
you bet.
A perfect example. They've got all the old people. There are no young people. They have the same problem with us, the baby boomers, because they're going to have to pay us all Social Security, but there's nobody going to be paying into it.
Well, Russia is finding out the same hard news. I saw a story today. Japan is actually, the government is actually paying people to go to dating parties,
right,
in the hopes that they will mysteriously procreate in order to produce a future generation.
Just kind of quickly, what do we need to know about the upcoming primary elections?
Well, the fact of the matter is that the fundamental problem we face at the legislature is in the House leadership. We must make some changes. We must find some new leadership.
Are we talking about the Speaker of the House? Is that where we are?
Well, we're going to call it the leadership of the Idaho
legislature. So I'll call it the Speaker, you call it the leadership. Because I've seen what's going on in this legislative session.
Well, under Lawrence Stady, we passed something like 8 pieces of pro-life legislation.
Right.
Under the new Speaker, we've passed none.
I understand that. So it was okay for the legislators to take the time to make sure they got a pay raise, but not take the time to get the legislation through for pro-life.
Well, I tell you, one of the bitter twists of the knife for me, we were hanging fire, waiting to get our bill printed in the Senate State Affairs Committee. We had some heroes this session, I should mention. Bart Davis put an immense amount of time in getting this legislation ready and passed. And then we found out that about 2 weeks ago, that we were not going to be scheduled. The last day we had hopes of getting a print hearing for our bill, we couldn't. They didn't have time to deal with it because on that very day they were printing legislation to increase the pay for constitutional officers.
There you go.
And it tells you, I guess, what the priorities of this legislature are.
I agree with you 100%. How can we help Idaho Chooses Life?
Well, we have a great website, idahochooseslife.org. There's contact information, our phone number's up there, email address, and of course, an opportunity to donate if you want to make changes and help us make changes in this legislature. That's the way to do it.
Well, I encourage everybody to donate to this great cause, and I've known David for a while. He means what he says. We'd like to thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope to see you next week at the same time. Or if you happen to be up early Saturday morning, you can catch me 5 to 8 on Kevin Miller's show, 580 KIDO, Conservative Talk Radio. We'd also like to thank the technicians and staff of TVC TV for making this broadcast possible. They are a non-profit organization. If you would like to donate, you can do so by going to their website at www.tvctvonline.org. Good night, Idaho.